Captain Maya Vance sat in the absolute stillness of her concrete cell, the sterile fluorescent lights humming like a swarm of angry hornets as she counted the final heartbeats of a life once defined by honor, but now marked for erasure. Tomorrow morning, at dawn, the military justice system would inject lethal silence into her veins for a crime she couldn't remember committing. But as her final act on this earth, she didn't ask for a priest or a stake. She demanded to see Rex, the Belgian Malinois, who had shared her blood and her breath through 5 combat tours. Before we reveal the explosive truth that shattered the foundations of the Pentagon, please hit that subscribe button and stay with me until the very last word. And drop your city in the comments below so I can see exactly where our community of warriors is watching from tonight. The steel door groaned, a heavy industrial sound that echoed like a gunshot through the detention wing, and the base chaplain stepped into the small circle of artificial light. "Captain Vance," he said, his voice carrying the practiced heavy weight of a man who dealt in finalities. "You are entitled to one final request before the scheduled hour." Maya didn't lift her head from her hands. She was a ghost in gray fatigues, the hollowed-out remains of a legend once whispered about in the mountains of Kandahar. "I want Rex," she whispered. Her voice was a raspy, jagged edge that hadn't been used in weeks. The chaplain blinked, his brow furrowing as he looked at the woman the media had labeled a rogue traitor. "Your retired K-9 partner? We thought—" "Well, usually it's family, Captain." "My family is gone," Maya snapped, her eyes flashing with a brief, white-hot spark of the special ops commander she used to be. "And Rex is the only soul left who knows the real me." The request rippled through the facility, drawing sneers from the guards who saw only a murderer and silent, uncomfortable glances from the officers who still remembered her medals. For 12 years, Maya and Rex had been an unstoppable force, a binary weapon of instinct and steel that had located IEDs and rescued hostages when hope was a luxury they couldn't afford. But all of that had incinerated in a single night outside a classified weapons depot, where Maya was found kneeling over the body of her best friend, Staff Sergeant Miller, with her own sidearm still smoking and blood painting her hands. "You have 10 minutes, the warden said as he entered the holding room, took out his face a mask of bureaucratic indifference. 10 minutes to say goodbye to the animal before we carry out the sentence." Maya stood, her wrist restraints clinking with a rhythmic, mournful sound, and waited as the military transport vehicle rumbled into the courtyard. Inside his crate, Rex was older now, with gray fur frosting his muzzle like early winter snow, but his amber eyes were still sharp enough to cut through the bullshit of a dozen lies. As the handler, Lieutenant Miller, opened the crate, Rex didn't bolt. He stood with a quiet, lethal authority that made the guards take an instinctive step back. "Ready, buddy?" Miller whispered. "She's in there." Rex didn't whine, and he didn't wag his tail. Instead, he caught a scent, a cocktail of sterile bleach, fear, and a metallic undertone that triggered a memory buried deep in his primitive, tactical brain. The moment Rex crossed the threshold of the holding room, the air seemed to thicken, a localized storm of tension that made Maya's breath hitch in her throat. "Rex! Hey, boy," she breathed, her hands trembling as she reached out as far as the chains would allow. But the dog didn't run to her. He froze, his ears pinning back against his skull as a low, guttural growl began to vibrate through the floorboards. Rex, easy," Miller commanded. He was confused, his hand moving toward the leash as the dog's hackles rose like a jagged mountain range. The guards gripped their weapons, their eyes widening. "The dog knows," one muttered. "Even the animal knows she's a monster." Maya's heart shattered in real time. She stared at the partner who had saved her life 100 times, and all she saw was the same accusation that had sent her to death row. "Rex, please," she sobbed. "Not you too. Not today." But Rex wasn't just growling. He was circling her with a sharp, investigative intensity, his nose working overtime, sniffing the air around her left shoulder with a frantic, desperate focus. Suddenly, the dog barked, a sharp, high-pitched alert that every handler in the room recognized as the signal for a high-priority threat. "What is he doing?" the warden demanded. "He's acting like he found a bomb." "He hasn't found a bomb," Lieutenant Miller whispered, his face turning a ghostly shade of white as he stepped closer to the prisoner. "He's alerting on a trauma site." Miller reached out and pulled back the collar of Maya's gray fatigues, unexposing a deep, jagged scar nestled beneath her shoulder blade. A wound she had never reported. A wound the court-martial had never documented. "That's a puncture wound from a combat knife," Miller said, his voice shaking with a sudden, terrifying realization. "Rex is trained to identify hidden injuries in high-stress extractions." Maya stared at the floor, her mind a kaleidoscope of fractured memories. I don't remember. I thought I fell." "You didn't fall, Maya," Miller said, his eyes locking onto hers. "Rex is saying you were the victim that night, not the perpetrator." The major twist hit the room like a physical shockwave. The dog wasn't barking at her guilt. He was identifying the physical evidence of her innocence that had been hidden in plain sight. Suddenly, Rex turned his focus away from Maya. He lunged toward the line of guards standing by the wall, his focus locking onto Master Sergeant Vance, the man who had been the primary witness against her. The dog didn't just growl. He launched himself at the steel mesh of the gate, his teeth bared in a silent, murderous promise of retribution. "Control that dog," Sergeant Vance shouted, his voice cracking as he stepped back, his hands trembling in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. "He's matching the scent, Warden," Miller shouted over the dog's frantic barking. "He's saying that man was in the weapons facility the night Miller died." The warden's eyes narrowed as he looked at the sergeant. "Sergeant, you testified under oath that you were at the base hospital that entire night." Vance's face drained of color, sweat beading on his brow as the dog's accusation stripped away his mask of military precision. In that sterile, fluorescent room, the memory finally exploded back into Maya's mind. She saw the blade, she felt the shocking cold of the steel, and she heard a voice, Vance's voice, whispering that she would be the perfect scapegoat. The truth didn't arrive with a gavel or a document. It arrived on 4 legs, fueled by a loyalty that refused to let a warrior die for a lie. Vance recoiled, his trembling hands instinctively reaching for his sidearm as Rex's barking pierced his soul like a verdict from hell. Maya collapsed as fractured memories began to gouge into her brain with agonizing precision. She remembered the sensation of cold steel piercing her skin and a wicked voice whispering for her to just go to sleep so it could all end. "Why were you there, Vance? Why does Rex recognize your scent on this wound?" Miller roared, stepping between Maya and the traitor, while the warden signaled for security to lock down the room. Vance's silence wasn't repentance. It was the calculation of a cornered beast, realizing this K9 had carried the truth from the Kandahar battlefield all the way to this execution chamber. Rex lunged, claws scraping hard against the steel mesh, his amber eyes bloodshot with a primal urge to tear apart the man who had pushed his master toward death. Vance abruptly drew his weapon, but not to attack. He pressed the cold barrel against his own temple in a fit of desperate panic, screaming that it was all too late, and Maya had to die to keep the system running. Maya looked directly into the muzzle, no longer fearing death, only pained by the realization that the comrade she had always trusted was the one who staged the murder of Staff Sergeant Chen. "You didn't just kill Chen, you killed the honor of this military!" Maya screamed, her voice echoing through the cold corridor, awakening the last vestiges of conscience hiding behind stiff uniforms. Miller, quick as a flash, kicked the gun from Vance's hand before he could pull the trigger, pinning the traitor to the floor amidst Rex's thunderous roars. A horrifying twist erupted when the warden received an emergency call from command, announcing that hidden cameras at the weapons depot had been recovered from a secret server. It turned out that Colonel Webb, the man presiding over Maya's trial, had ordered the evidence erased to cover up the black market arms ring that Vance was merely a small pawn in. Rex suddenly stopped barking and approached Maya, gently licking the scar on her shoulder as a comfort that the battle for justice had only just officially begun. Maya gripped her chains, her eyes burning with a new determination. She would not walk to the lethal injection room, but to the courtroom to unmask the true villains. Rex's loyalty had not only saved Maya's life, it had triggered a time bomb aimed directly at the heart of the corruption rotting from within. The warden's hand trembled as he gripped the receiver. The metallic click of the line disconnecting echoed like a death knell for the conspiracy. "Colonel Webb is already under arrest at the Pentagon," the warden whispered. His voice was hollow, stripped of the bureaucratic mask that had condemned Maya hours earlier. Maya felt a cold, jagged surge of adrenaline. The name of her presiding judge, the man who had demanded her execution, was now the architect of her ruin. "He shot Chen with my sidearm, didn't he?" Maya gasped. She lunged toward the table, her restraints clanking with a rhythmic, violent desperation. Vance, pinned to the floor by Miller's knee, let out a guttural, defeated sob. "We had to. You weren't supposed to be there, Maya. You and that damn dog were a variable we couldn't control." Rex let out a sharp, victorious bark. He stood over the traitor, his amber eyes burning with the satisfaction of a hunter who had finally cornered the wolf in the fold. "You stabbed her to frame a struggle," Miller roared. He tightened his grip on Vance's collar, his face a mask of righteous fury. "The wound. I didn't remember it because I went into shock," Maya whispered. Her mind finally bridged the gap between the pain and the darkness. The major twist ripped through the room when the warden looked at the clock. "The execution order. It's still active. The governor's office isn't picking up." A mini-climax erupted as the intercom crackled with the voice of the lead executioner. "Warden, we are moving the prisoner now. Protocol dictates we proceed unless a hardline override is received." "No, she's innocent," Miller screamed. He looked at the guards, but they were bound by the cold, unyielding iron of military procedure. Maya looked at Rex. She saw the gray fur around his muzzle and the absolute unwavering loyalty in his gaze. "If they take me, Rex, you show them," she whispered. "You don't let them bury the truth with me." Suddenly, the heavy steel door began to slide open. The extraction team stood there, faces hidden behind tactical visors, ready to carry out a sentence for a crime that no longer existed. Rex lunged in front of Maya. He didn't growl. He stood in a perfect, rigid guard stance, a four-legged shield against the machinery of death. "Stand down, Rex!" the lead executioner barked. He raised a tranquilizer rifle, his finger hovering over the trigger. The tension was a physical weight. A single twitch would result in the death of the only witness who had never lied. "If you shoot that dog, you'll have to shoot me too!" Miller cried. He stepped into the line of fire, his own honor finally outweighing his rank. A hook of pure terror gripped Maya's heart. She realized the system was so broken, it would kill her just to satisfy its own schedule. The warden's phone rang again. A piercing, shrill sound that cut through the standoff like a siren. "Stop! The stay of execution has been signed!" the warden yelled. He threw the phone onto the table, his face slick with sweat. Maya collapsed against Rex, her tears soaked into his fur, the salt of her relief mixing with the scent of a partner who had carried the truth through the darkness. But as the guards lowered their weapons, Maya looked at Vance. "Where is the weapon, Vance? The one Webb used?" Vance looked at the ceiling. "It's not just Webb, the whole command. They'll never let you walk out of here alive." Vance's warning hung in the sterile air like a poison gas, turning the warden's relief into a cold, paralyzing dread. "If Webb is under arrest, who is currently authorizing the lockdown of this facility?" Maya demanded. Her voice was a whip crack that broke the warden's stupor. The warden reached for his radio, but only static screamed back at him. The hardline override hadn't just been a stay of execution, it had been a kill switch for the building's communications. Miller stepped away from Vance, his hand hovering over his holster as the heavy industrial lights overhead flickered and died, plunging the holding room into a terrifying, rhythmic crimson glow of emergency power. "They aren't coming to set you free, Maya. They're coming to finish the job." Vance shrieked from the floor. His face was a mask of jagged, hysterical terror. Rex let out a low, bone-vibrating growl that wasn't directed at Vance this time. He was staring at the ventilation ducts, his nostrils flaring as he caught the acrid chemical scent of an aerosolized sedative. "Gas! They're pumping gas into the vents!" Miller roared. He ripped a piece of his uniform and pressed it against Maya's face, his eyes searching for an extraction point that didn't exist. The extraction team at the door didn't move to help. They stood like monolithic statues, their tactical visors reflecting the red emergency strobes as they waited for the occupants to succumb. Maya felt the world begin to tilt, the familiar fog of the night Chen died creeping back into her lungs. "Not again. Rex, don't let them. Not again." The dog didn't succumb. His combat-hardened lungs filtered the air with a desperate, primal efficiency as he lunged at the heavy reinforced glass of the warden's observation booth. The major twist shattered the room when the glass didn't break. But a hidden compartment behind the warden's desk slid open, revealing a second sidearm and a digital recorder that had been running since the moment Rex entered the room. "I didn't just record the dog, Maya. I recorded Vance's confession," the warden yelled through his cloth mask. He grabbed the device, his eyes burning with a sudden lethal defiance. But the hook was deeper. The warden wasn't just an administrator. He was the internal affairs mole who had been waiting for a catalyst like Rex to break the silence of the ghost unit. "The backup isn't coming because Webb's loyalists have seized the perimeter," the warden shouted over the rising hiss of the gas. Miller grabbed the heavy metal table and flipped it, creating a makeshift barricade for Maya and Rex. "Then we make our own exit," Rex barked twice, a sharp, tactical command that Adrian recognized from their deepest raids. The dog was pointing to a weak point in the masonry behind the fireplace. As the first tactical team breached the door with flashbangs, Maya grabbed Rex's harness, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "If we die here, the truth dies with us!" Maya cried. She looked at the dog, the only living soul who had never betrayed her. Rex didn't hesitate. He launched his massive body into the weakened wall, the impact echoing like a sledgehammer against the foundations of the conspiracy. The light from the hallway began to spill in, but it wasn't the light of rescue. It was the cold, clinical glare of a team sent to ensure no witnesses left the room alive. The gas hissed with a predatory hunger, filling the narrow space between the makeshift barricade and the crumbling masonry, where Rex clawed at the foundation of the conspiracy. Maya's lungs burned, the familiar, terrifying fog of that night in Kandahar threatening to pull her back into the darkness. "Rex, go! Break it!" Maya choked out, her voice a ragged sliver of its former command. The dog didn't whine or hesitate. He threw his 90-pound frame against the weakened brickwork, a living battering ram fueled by a loyalty that transcended the physical pain of the impact. The wall groaned, a heavy, grinding sound of mortar surrendering to the will of a warrior on 4 legs. From the doorway, the first flashbang detonated, a white-hot scream of light that turned the room into a chaotic, overexposed nightmare. Miller fired a warning shot into the ceiling, the thunderous report momentarily staggering the tactical team that had been sent to ensure Maya never drew another breath. "Warden, the recording!" Miller yelled, his eyes watering from the gas as he grabbed the digital device and shoved it into the pocket of Maya's gray fatigues. "This is your life, Maya. You don't let them take it again." The masonry finally gave way, collapsing into a jagged hole that led into the old service tunnels beneath the detention facility. Maya scrambled through the dust and debris, her hands raw and bleeding, but she didn't feel the pain. She felt Rex's fur brush against her leg, a constant grounding presence that guided her through the pitch-black labyrinth. Behind them, the muffled sounds of a firefight erupted, Miller and the warden holding the line against Webb's loyalists in a desperate final stand. "Stay close, boy," Maya whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. They ran for what felt like miles, guided only by Rex's superior tactical senses and the faint, cold scent of the outside world. Suddenly Rex stopped, his hackles rising as he let out a low, bone-vibrating growl. Through the end of the tunnel, a silhouette stood framed against the rising dawn. Colonel Webb, the man who had presided over her death sentence, holding a suppressed sidearm with a calm, murderous precision. "You were always too stubborn to die quietly, Captain," Webb said, his voice a smooth, cold edge that had once commanded her respect. "But the dog is a loose end I cannot allow to walk free." The profound twist shattered the morning air when Webb didn't aim at Maya. He aimed at Rex. Maya lunged forward, not to save herself, but to shield the only partner who had never lied to her. But Rex was faster. The Belgian Malinois launched himself into the air, a blur of charcoal and amber fur, catching Webb's arm before the trigger could be squeezed. The shot went wild, ricocheting off the stone walls as Webb screamed in pain, his arm trapped in the iron grip of a combat dog that remembered every detail of the betrayal. Maya tackled Webb, her fingers locking around the throat of the man who had tried to bury her alive. You killed Chen! You stole my life! She screamed, the rage of years of wrongful imprisonment fueling her strength. Webb clawed at her, his face turning a sickly shade of purple as the digital recorder fell from Maya's pocket and began to play Vance's confession at full volume. I remember now, Maya hissed, her eyes locking onto Webb's fading gaze. Shaw, I remember the blade, and I remember your face watching from the shadows. Suddenly, the roar of rotors filled the air, Black Hawk helicopters bearing the markings of the Joint Special Operations Command swept over the tree line. The internal affairs investigation hadn't just been the warden, it had reached the very top. The real military police swarmed the area, their weapons locked onto Webb and his remaining conspirators. Drop it, Captain! A voice boomed over the megaphone. Maya let go of Webb's throat and fell back into the damp grass, her chest heaving as the weight of 100 lies finally began to lift. Rex stood over her, his tail wagging slowly, not with excitement, but with the quiet, dignified understanding of a warrior who had finally brought his handler home. Days later, at a press conference that gripped the entire nation, Maya stood in her restored dress blues, her medals pinned back onto her chest where they belonged. My name is Captain Maya Vance, she began, her voice steady and clear as she looked into the cameras. For years, you were told I was a traitor, but the truth was carried by a witness who couldn't speak. She looked down at Rex, who sat faithfully at her side, his amber eyes reflecting a peace he hadn't known in years. Honor is not a word found in a courtroom. It is a promise kept between those who bleed together. As she walked away from the podium, Rex leaned into her leg, his presence a constant reminder that justice had prevailed. The system had tried to kill her, but it had forgotten one fundamental truth of the battlefield. A soldier never surrenders, and a loyal heart never forgets the road back to the light. Loyalty is the ultimate weapon, and the bond between warriors is a fortress that no amount of corruption can ever tear down.